Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another Instant Deck Tech. So as you know, Tuesday means it's Type 2 or Standard Tuesday, and this week we are heading to Ixalan Standard to check out a super sweet, really unique controlled deck. This is Sarcophagus Control, comes to us from Kel Kolko, who took it to an undefeated finish in a competitive league on Magic Online. So congrats to Kel Kolcho on a super sweet deck. A quick reminder before we break down Sarcophagus Control for Ixalan Standard. If you enjoy this deck and you want to see it made into videos, take a minute, click the like button, the subscribe button, leave a comment, anything you can do to support your deck, because whichever deck is most popular gets a shot at being made into videos next week. So Sarcophagus Control is built around, well, we'll get to the Sarcophagus in a minute, but it's built around Drakehaven. Drakehaven is our finisher. It's actually the only main deck way we have of actually killing our opponent. This is it, Drakehaven or bust. So 3 mana, we get an enchantment where whenever we cycle or discard a card, we get to pay 1, make a 2/2 blue Drake creature token with flying. And that's kind of the primary plan of our deck, is we have a ton of cycling cards. So as the game goes along, we cycle, make some Drakes, cycle, make some Drakes. The fact that we can do this at instant speed means we can leave up our counter spells, leave up our removal. If we don't need to interact with our opponent, then we just cycle a few times on our opponent's end step, make some flyers, start beating our opponent down. Since we need to cycle a ton of cards to make our Drakehaven finisher work, this brings us to our namesake card, Abandon Sarcophagus, which is really awesome in this deck. So Abandon Sarcophagus basically makes it so we can cast all of our cycling cards from our graveyard. However, if a cycling card would go into our graveyard without being cycled, we have to exile it. So that means basically once we cast a card with cycling from our graveyard, it gets exiled instead of going back into our graveyard. So we can't just keep casting the same cycling card over and over and over again. So the thing about Abandon Sarcophagus is it seems like a really risky card to build around. Because it's an artifact, a lot of people play a Braid in Standard. The thing is, our plan is not to cast Abandon Sarcophagus on turn 3. The idea of this deck is, in the early game, we're going to be kind of annoying our opponent with counter spells and removal, getting things set up, maybe getting down our Drakehaven, and then Abandon Sarcophagus is going to come down on turn 5, turn 7, turn 10, and suddenly it's essentially just drawing us a whole bunch of cards, like 10 cards from cards that we've cast and cycled earlier in the game, and then we have a whole bunch more counter spells, a whole bunch more card draw spells, a whole bunch more removal spells that we can suddenly just start casting again. So what cycling cards do we have to support our Drakehaven and eventually recast with Abandon Sarcophagus? Well, we start off with some counter spells, and these cards are super key. In the early game, we can use them to counter our opponent's stuff, censor, and also countervailing winds. And then in the late game, we get to reuse them. We can even cycle them away in the early game, and then in the late game, use them to counter our opponent's stuff. So really, really powerful in our deck. Countervailing winds is often just a hard counter in the late game. So this is why we're not especially worried about a Braid on our Sarcophagus, because by the time we cast it, as long as we leave up enough mana for countervailing winds, even if our opponent goes to try to immediately abrade it, we just cast our countervailing winds from the graveyard, counter the Braid, and we have all that action to go. And in the early game, we just cycle these to make Drakes, move through our deck to find our important pieces. We also have Renewed Faith and Hieroglyphic Illumination. So Renewed Faith gains us a bit of life. We can even gain life when we cycle it, so it keeps us out of the danger zone against aggressive decks. And then in the late game, we just gain a whole bunch of life, so it's going to be hard for our opponent to kill us with lightning strikes and Hazoret activations, desert damage, that kind of stuff. Illumination just draws us a bunch of cards. It's awesome. We can cast it in the early game. Well, we can cycle it in the very early game if we need to. In the mid game, we can draw 2 cards with it. And then in the late game, after we play our Sarcophagus, we can draw 2 more cards. So it's just a huge source of card advantage. We even have Cast Out as a removal spell with cycling. So we might just cast this normally, but we can always just cycle it on turn 1, turn 2, in the mid game to get a Drake, and then cast it from our graveyard at that instant speed with Flash once we get down our Abandon Sarcophagus. We have some cycling lands as well, which don't work as well with Sarcophagus because we don't actually cast them, so we can't get them back from our graveyard. Sarcophagus does not work like a Crucible of Worlds. However, it is another way that we can make our Drakes with Drakeshaven, and we can always just play them as lands if we need to as well. So just additional cycling effects for our deck. Otherwise, we have some non-cycling removal. Fumigate, Settle the Wreckage just to sweep away our opponent's board. Farm to Market's pretty sweet. It kills something, then it kind of faithless lootings from the graveyard with the Aftermath ability. And of course, the looting ability is another way we can just discard our cycling cards for our Abandoned Sarcophagus. Then we have Search for Escanto, which is just a huge source of card advantage. Lets us mill over cycling cards in the early game to eventually recast with Sarcophagus. And once we flip it around, we're just getting a free spell every turn. No creatures in our main deck, so it's finding our Drakehavens, finding cycling cards for our Drakehavens, finding our Sarcophagus to draw us all our cards in the graveyard is super powerful in our deck. Mana base, we talked about the cycling lands. We also have Glacial Fortress, 1 Sheffet Dunes to pump up our Drakes and kind of have a faster clock, a bunch of basic lands, some Field of Ruins to deal with our opponent's flip into land spells. In the sideboard, we kind of have some sweet second level sideboard cards. So our opponent's going to see the no creatures in our main deck, probably going to bring in Duresses, bring in Negates. So to counter that, we can bring in Regal Caracles. Our opponent probably won't have sweepers, maybe not even spot removal. And if our opponent doesn't have a lot of removal, Caracle is a great way to close out the game quickly. Getting into the trials can also give us a fast clock that slips down in the early game. Authority of the Consoles is for Ramadan Bread primarily, just to gain some life, slow down the hasty threats. Negate and the 4th Countervailing Winds to fight through control matchups. Crook of Condemnation to deal with graveyards. Forsake the Worldly gives us some artifact and enchantment removal that also works well with our cycling plan. And that is Sarcophagus Control for Standard. And that's our Instant Deck Tech for today. So thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I will talk to you soon. Thanks for watching the video. If you enjoyed it, help us out by clicking that like button down below. And to keep up on all the latest and greatest, click that subscribe button. And don't forget to hit that bell icon to get alerts whenever we have new videos. And if you want to, check out some of our other sweet videos here and here.